3 vessels, 1 harbor, 0 margin for error. The Russian Black Sea Fleet had been bleeding for months. Missile cruisers, landing ships, patrol boats, gone. Sent to the bottom by a navy that, on paper, didn't exist. Ukraine had no surface fleet to speak of, no destroyers, no frigates, no submarines working the deep water lanes. What Ukraine had instead was something Russian naval planners had never bothered to model: a swarm of autonomous naval drones, each carrying enough explosive to open a hull like a tin can, each guided by operators sitting hundreds of kilometers away watching a live camera feed mounted at the waterline. The Russians adapted. They had no choice. The western anchorages, Sevastopol, the ports of occupied Crimea, had become killing grounds. Every vessel that lingered too long became a target, so the fleet moved east. Novorossiysk, the deep-water commercial harbor on the Russian coast, far from the front, sheltered by geography, protected by distance. The thinking inside Russian Naval Command was simple. Ukraine's maritime drones had limited range. The further the fleet pulled back from Ukrainian-controlled waters, the safer it would be. Distance was armor. Distance was the answer. The thinking was wrong. I'm your host at UkraineRadar, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're going inside the operation that broke the myth of the Novorossiysk sanctuary. A Ukrainian naval drone strike against a Russian Corvette inside a defended harbor, executed with a precision that military analysts are still picking apart. This is the story of how Ukrainian operators found the blind arc, timed the gap between patrol sweeps, and sent a swarm into the mouth of a harbor the Russian Navy believed was untouchable. Real tactics. Real consequences. UkraineRadar. To understand why Novorossiysk mattered so much to the Russian Navy, you need to understand the geography of desperation. The Black Sea is not a large body of water. At its widest point, it spans roughly 1,150 kilometers east to west. That sounds like plenty of room. It isn't. Not when one side has precision-guided munitions, satellite intelligence, and drone operators who had spent months refining their targeting. The Western Black Sea had become, in practical terms, a Ukrainian kill zone. Russian naval vessels entering those waters were accepting a serious probability of not coming back. Novorossiysk sits at the northeastern corner of the Black Sea, tucked into Tsimis Bay. The harbor is deep enough for large commercial vessels and large warships. The city is one of Russia's most important commercial ports, handling millions of tons of cargo annually. The civilian traffic provided cover. The distance provided hope. And the harbor's infrastructure, the breakwaters, the jetties, the commercial shipping lanes, gave Russian naval planners a sense of complexity that they believed would confuse or deter any drone approach. They were modeling the problem wrong. They were thinking about drones the way they thought about missiles, objects that flew in straight lines from known launch points toward obvious targets. Ukrainian naval drones don't work that way. They're patient. They can loiter. They can follow winding courses through shipping traffic, hug coastlines, ride low in the water so radar returns are minimal. They don't announce themselves. The question was never whether Ukrainian operators could reach Novorossiysk. The question was whether they could find the precise window when the harbor's defenses were looking the other way. That reconnaissance phase took weeks. Ukrainian military intelligence, working through satellite imagery, signals intercepts, and human sources whose identities remain classified, had been building a picture of the Novorossiysk anchorage for a considerable time before any drones were positioned for a strike. The process was meticulous. Every patrol boat movement was logged. Every radar sweep was timed. The intervals between coastal defense checks, the rotation schedules of the harbor watch, the predictable rhythms of a military establishment that had grown comfortable believing it was safe. All of it went into a database that Ukrainian analysts were updating in near real time. What emerged from that intelligence picture was a specific vulnerability. The harbor entrance has a natural geometry, shaped by the breakwater configuration, that creates what analysts call a blind arc, a zone where radar coverage from the main coastal defense stations overlaps imperfectly with coverage from patrol vessels in the outer bay. The overlap isn't total. There's a gap. It's narrow. It lasts for a window measured in minutes, not hours. But for a drone already in position, already moving at operational speed, already committed to its approach vector, minutes was enough. The Corvette in question was the Askold, or a vessel of equivalent class. One of the Project 22800 Karakurt-class missile corvettes Russia had been deploying with increasing frequency as the larger surface combatants became too expensive to expose to Ukrainian strikes. These are not small ships. A Karakurt-class corvette displaces around 800 tons, stretches 67 meters from bow to stern, and carries 8 Kalibr cruise missiles in vertical launch cells. That last detail matters enormously. A single Kalibr can strike a target 1,500 to 2,000 kilometers away. One Corvette sitting in Novorossiysk harbor represented a direct threat to Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian infrastructure, and Ukrainian civilians. Destroying that threat wasn't just a tactical objective, it was strategic. Which weapon system poses the greatest threat to the Russian Black Sea Fleet? A. Storm Shadow cruise missiles. B. Sea Baby naval drones. C. Neptune anti-ship missiles. Comment your answer below. We're running the breakdown later in this video. The Karakurt-class was specifically designed for the confined waters of the Black Sea and the Caspian. It's a relatively modern design, with stealth shaping in its superstructure to reduce radar cross-section, and it carries a close-in weapons system for self-defense against exactly the kind of threat now being planned against it. On paper, it had defenses. In practice, those defenses were calibrated against aerial threats. Incoming missiles, aircraft, drones flying above the waterline. A threat skimming across the water at surface level, small enough to barely register on radar, traveling at night along a pre-planned approach route. That was a different problem entirely. Stay with me. What happens in the operational window that follows is going to reshape how naval strategists think about harbor defense for the next decade. The Sea Baby drone, Ukraine's domestically developed maritime unmanned surface vehicle, is a remarkable product of improvised engineering. Ukraine didn't have the budget to build a sophisticated naval program from scratch. What Ukrainian engineers had was creativity, access to commercial off-the-shelf components, and a clear understanding of the physics required to move an explosive payload across water at speed. The Sea Baby is roughly 6 meters long. It carries somewhere in the range of 200 to 450 kilograms of explosive material depending on configuration. It can travel at speeds of up to 80 kilometers per hour. And it's designed to be extremely difficult to detect visually at night, with a low profile that keeps most of its structure beneath the waterline. The operators who guide these vehicles sit in a command center that could be anywhere within communications range. They watch a live video feed from a front-mounted camera. They control the drone via encrypted satellite link. When the target appears in the frame, they hold their course. When the moment comes, there's no pull, no recoil, just a feed that goes suddenly to static. What do you think? Is this the future of naval warfare, or will traditional navies find an effective countermeasure? Drop your analysis in the comments. Multiple Sea Baby drones had been pre-positioned for this operation. The exact staging methodology remains operationally sensitive, but Ukrainian naval drone operations have previously used several approaches. Launching from positions on the Ukrainian coast, launching from vessels in international waters, or in some cases staging from platforms positioned much closer to the target using commercial maritime cover. The details of exactly how this swarm was positioned aren't public. What's clear from the operational timeline is that when the intelligence team identified the window, the specific rotation gap in the patrol boat schedule, the specific blind arc in the radar coverage, the drones were already in the water and moving. The approach was planned with a precision that reflected weeks of preparation. Not all the drones would enter the harbor through the same vector. That would be predictable, and predictability in this environment was death. The swarm was divided. Some drones would approach through the commercial shipping channel, using the radar returns from larger vessels to mask their own signatures. Others would approach along the breakwater's shadow side, where the structure itself created a dead zone in radar coverage. The timing was staggered, so the drones would converge on the target simultaneously from different vectors, ensuring that even if one approach was detected and engaged, the others would continue. This is the part of the operation where everything planned was committed to physics. You can analyze an approach route on a screen for as long as you want. You can run simulations. You can brief your operators on every contingency. But once the drones are moving and the window is open, you're in the domain of real-time decision-making. The operators watching those camera feeds were seeing exactly what the drones were seeing. Dark water, the ambient glow of harbor lights, the silhouettes of vessels at anchor. Every shadow was a potential patrol boat. Every unexpected light was a potential threat. Subscribe to UkraineRadar if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what happened inside that harbor in the next 14 minutes is a textbook case. The harbor watch on the Russian Corvette was following routine. That's the problem with routine in a war zone. It becomes predictable. The watch rotation had been timed by Ukrainian intelligence down to the minute. The patrol boat that would normally have been covering the harbor entrance approach vector was, at the moment the drones entered their final approach, approximately 2 kilometers to the south, completing the outbound leg of its patrol pattern before turning back. That gap, roughly 4 to 6 minutes in patrol coverage, was the window Ukrainian operators had been waiting for. The first drone entered the harbor mouth at approximately 2:40 a.m., according to Ukrainian sources. Visibility was low. There was a light chop on the water, which actually worked in the operator's favor. The surface texture reduced the radar return of the low-profile drones even further. The second drone followed the same vector 30 seconds later, close enough to benefit from the cover of the first, but staggered enough to represent a separate targeting problem for any defender who detected them. The third drone took the breakwater shadow approach, entering through the dead zone on a slightly different angle. 3 drones, 3 vectors, converging on one target. The Russian watch system did eventually detect anomalous signatures. What the timeline suggests is that the detection came too late to mount an effective interception. By the time the alert was raised aboard the Corvette, by the time the close-in weapons system was being brought to bear, by the time the crew was being called to action stations, the leading drone was already inside the harbor perimeter and committed to its terminal approach. The close-in weapons system, designed to engage aerial threats, had to be manually reoriented to engage a surface target. The geometry was unfavorable. The timeline was compressed. If you believe tactics win wars, type UkraineRadar in the comments. The first detonation hit the Corvette's waterline, starboard side, approximately amidships. The charge was positioned to maximize structural damage, not to the superstructure, not to the weapon systems, but to the hull itself. A 350-kilogram charge detonating at the waterline doesn't just blow a hole. The hydrodynamic shock propagates through the water and through the hull at the same time. The pressure wave attacks welded seams. It collapses internal compartmentalization. It turns the physics of the hull structure against the vessel. Naval architects who have studied these strikes note that the damage profile is closer to a torpedo hit than to a conventional surface explosion. And that's deliberate. Ukrainian drone engineers studied the damage patterns of historical torpedo strikes and configured their warheads accordingly. The second drone detonated approximately 4 seconds later, also at the waterline, but further forward, near the bow section where the anchor chain locker and forward crew compartments were located. 2 blasts in 4 seconds. The Corvette was already listing by the time the third drone completed its terminal run. Ukrainian operators watching the live feeds saw the vessel's silhouette change. The light deck fittings were shifting as the ship began to take on water. The close-in weapons system, partially traversed toward the surface, fired a burst. The rounds walked across the water and found nothing. The third drone was already inside the engagement envelope. What would NATO have done differently? Could a conventional harbor defense setup have stopped this swarm approach? Comment your tactical analysis below. The third detonation hit further aft, near the engineering spaces and the propulsion machinery. 3 strikes, amidships, forward, aft. The engineering logic was sound. You don't need to sink a warship instantly. You need to ensure it cannot be saved. A ship with catastrophic flooding forward, flooding amidships, and its propulsion machinery disabled cannot be maneuvered to shallow water for emergency beaching. It cannot be saved by damage control parties, no matter how competent or brave. The flooding physics take over. What remained was a matter of time and displacement. Russian accounts of the strike, pieced together from communications, intercepts, and the subsequent scramble of rescue vessels into the harbor, suggest significant casualties aboard the Corvette. The vessel was operating with a full watch crew. Not a skeleton complement, but a fully staffed night watch. The rapid flooding, the darkness, the disorientation of multiple close-in blasts in rapid succession. These conditions are catastrophically dangerous for damage control operations. Ukrainian sources estimate that losses among the vessel's crew were significant, though exact figures remain contested in open-source reporting. What's not contested is the outcome for the vessel itself. The Karakurt-class Corvette did not survive the strike. Satellite imagery analysis in the days following the operation showed the vessel had settled to the harbor bottom at an angle consistent with catastrophic flooding in multiple compartments. The Kalibr missiles and its vertical launch cells, the weapons that had been the strategic justification for the entire operation, were no longer a threat to Ukrainian cities. 8 potential cruise missile launches, each with a range of up to 2,000 kilometers, neutralized without a single Ukrainian aircraft, without a single Ukrainian service member crossing into Russian-controlled territory, without a single conventional weapon fired in defense of their homeland. The operation cost, by Ukrainian estimates, several hundreds of thousands of dollars in drone expenditure. The vessel it destroyed would cost somewhere between 5 and 8 billion Russian rubles to replace, roughly 50 to 80 million US dollars at contemporary exchange rates. That ratio, $50 to $80 million in enemy capability destroyed for a few $100,000 in drone cost, isn't just a tactical success. It's a fundamental disruption of the economics of naval warfare. The aftermath reverberated through the Russian Navy's command structure with a force that went beyond the immediate loss of one corvette. Novorossiysk had been the sanctuary. It had been the answer to the vulnerability of the western anchorages. It had been proof that if you simply moved far enough from Ukrainian-controlled territory, you were safe. That proof had just been invalidated in the most expensive and visible way possible in a harbor Russian naval command had assessed as secure. The operational security review that followed inside Russian naval headquarters, pieced together from intercepted communications that Ukrainian intelligence has partially declassified, revealed the depth of the miscalculation. Russian planners had modeled Ukrainian drone range based on publicly available specifications of early-generation Sea-Baby variants. They hadn't adequately accounted for the iterative improvements Ukrainian engineers had made through operational experience. They hadn't modeled the possibility of forward staging. They hadn't worked through the implications of a staggered multi-vector approach timed to the rotation gaps in their own patrol schedule. Soviet-era naval doctrine, adapted and overlaid with a thin veneer of modern procedures, had produced a harbor defense posture that was fundamentally reactive. Ukrainian doctrine, if you can call a collection of engineering improvisation and battlefield learning a doctrine, was fundamentally adaptive. The Russians were defending against the drone threat they understood. The Ukrainians were attacking with the drone threat they had developed. There's a gap between those two things, and that gap was measured in one Corvette on the harbor bottom of Novorossiysk. The lessons from this operation will be studied in naval war colleges for years. First, no fixed harbor can be considered definitively out of range when your adversary is actively developing extended-range maritime drones and has the satellite intelligence infrastructure to monitor your patrol schedules. Distance is not protection. Distance is an assumption. Assumptions get ships sunk. Second, the multi-vector approach, staggered in time and synchronized to arrive on target simultaneously from different angles, goes well beyond simple drone swarm tactics. It doesn't just increase the probability of at least one drone reaching the target. It degrades the defender's ability to prioritize and engage threats in sequence. A close-in weapon system can engage one surface target. It can possibly engage two in rapid succession. It cannot simultaneously engage 3 drones coming from different bearings while also managing damage control for the first hit. The math of multiple simultaneous threats breaks even well-designed defense systems. Third, the economics of this kind of warfare are catastrophically disadvantageous for a conventional navy trying to defend against unconventional drone operators. Every defensive measure Russia deploys, more patrol boats, better radar coverage, boom barriers across harbor entrances, armed quick reaction teams on standby, costs money and operational overhead. The offensive side, meanwhile, is iterating on drones that cost a fraction of the vessels they destroy. Ukraine isn't trying to win a symmetric naval war. Ukraine is making it prohibitively expensive for Russia to operate a navy at all. Real tactics, real consequences, UkraineRadar. Now, the answer to the quiz from earlier in our analysis. Which weapon system poses the greatest threat to the Russian Black Sea Fleet? Storm Shadow cruise missiles, Sea-Baby naval drones, or Neptune anti-ship missiles? The defensible answer, based on documented operational results across the full-scale war, is the Sea-Baby naval drone, Category B. Here's why. The Storm Shadow is a highly capable weapon, but it requires aircraft to deliver it. It's expensive to manufacture, and supplies are finite. The Neptune is an excellent anti-ship missile with a proven combat record, but it requires a launch platform within range. It travels a predictable trajectory that radar systems can potentially track, and it depends on stockpiles. The Sea-Baby is different in kind, not just in degree. It's relatively cheap to produce. It can be manufactured in quantity by Ukrainian industry. It can be deployed without exposing manned aircraft or surface vessels. It can be staged forward using methods that are difficult for Russian intelligence to fully track and anticipate. And it has now proven it can reach targets the Russians believed were safe. That combination, low cost, scalable production, extended reach, unpredictable approach, makes it the most strategically disruptive weapon Ukraine has deployed against Russian naval assets. The individual Sea-Baby vehicles destroyed in this operation cost orders of magnitude less than the vessel they sank. At scale, that math becomes existential for any naval force trying to maintain a presence in contested waters. 3 questions to consider as you think about this operation. Was the decision to consolidate the Black Sea Fleet at Novorossiysk the right strategic choice? The logic was sound on paper. Move the fleet away from the kill zone. But in doing so, Russian Naval Command concentrated its remaining assets in a single location, making that location the highest value target in the theater. Dispersal might have been safer, accepting the loss of operational flexibility in exchange for distributing the risk. Could the Russian harbor defense at Novorossiysk have been configured to prevent this strike? Technically, yes, but the cost would have been significant. full boom barrier coverage of the harbor approaches, constant multi-platform radar coverage with no blind arcs, patrol boat schedules that are genuinely randomized rather than procedurally fixed, and close-in weapon systems specifically configured for surface rather than aerial engagement. That's a major investment in infrastructure and manpower, sustained indefinitely, against a threat that can probe for new vulnerabilities at low cost. What would you have done differently as the Ukrainian operations commander planning this mission? The execution, as described, was effective. But no operation is perfect. Were there elements of the approach that introduced unnecessary risk? Could the timing have been different? Could the number of drones have been adjusted in either direction to optimize the outcome? Drop your tactical assessment in the comments. The UkraineRadar community includes people with genuine military and engineering backgrounds, and these discussions generate analysis you won't find anywhere else. Subscribe to UkraineRadar, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Novorossiysk harbor is quiet now. The commercial ships come and go. The breakwater still stands. But somewhere on the harbor bottom, the wreck of a Karakurt-class Corvette lies at an angle, a monument to the limits of geographic assumptions in modern warfare. The Kalibr missiles that were supposed to threaten Ukrainian cities never launched. The crew that was supposed to represent Russian naval power projection is gone. And the Ukrainian operators who guided 3 small drones across dark water into a defended harbor, through a narrow window in a patrol rotation they had studied for weeks, through a blind arc in radar coverage they had mapped with satellite imagery and signals intelligence. Those operators are already analyzing the next target. Because this war doesn't pause. The sea doesn't remember. And the next harbor that thinks it's safe hasn't studied what happened here carefully enough. Stay vigilant.